was really embedded in the spirit of the house. Here, there's another view just to the south of the master bedroom. And Tom was not ashamed to really kind of come up and nestle close to the architecture and let these two pieces be completely inseparable there. And here I think the trellis, in its scale, Tom and I struggled forever about exactly what height this should be. And we took the height of the trellis directly to the height of the apple trees. That understory, that canopy there, began to relate to the linden trees, to the apple trees, and to the planting, so that it all became in scale with each other. And Tom and I spent a lot of time talking about exactly what that should be. And here's another shot of the master bedroom. You can see this is one of my favorite places, this little plinth that Tom and I made here as one little step in this place. And there, kind of seeing the art, the architecture, the furniture, everything coming together with the scale and the beauty of the trellis. This photograph is taken by Scott Francis in the morning there as the light begins to come over the trees. And then here in the living room, where the art really comes together and just takes over the space. Tom and I worked for a long time with this skylight here that lights this very particular piece. The fireplace completely transparent there. And we wanted, as we began to organize the plan, as you'll see in a couple of sketches that Tom made, we wanted all of the walls in the house to run perpendicular to the house, so that as you moved along, it was more like a film strip. That as you moved along, you got these glimpses of the garden that were framed in kind of a Japanese way, either of the garden to the south or the sound to the northern side. And we put this skylight in there to begin to recall the kind of randomness here. And these vaults that you see begin to define the order of the house. The ceiling is the only plastic part of the house that is made, because it is the kind of giver of the top light in there. And we wanted the way the light comes in to be sculptural and soft and poetic here. Here, the little dining room, how Tom beautifully curated these paintings around this space, precisely dictating the size of these walls, the height of the pictures. We built model after model in the office to understand the scale of the wall to the scale of the picture, the placement of this molded skylight here. The view of the sky happened before you entered the full nature of the room there, and how the trellis then frames the sound. And then this view of this side of the house, that the living room then, just as the master bedroom did, began to take over this western side, one of my favorite sides. These low trees that were impacted by the winds and the salt, the kind of existing stone wall, the apple trees there, the scale of the trellis, the scale of the room, that really began to participate in that western side in the same way that the master bedroom just embraced that little garden there, trying to take every garden opportunity that Tom had made before and to make the house kind of respond. One of those great notions here that Tom never wanted to puncture this granite here, so we put the lights out on the lawn there that softly light the trellis. And that was the same moment when we took all of the overhead lights. I think that was when our lighting designer resigned. He just couldn't take it anymore, that we would dare to take all of the lights out of the ceiling. How in the world are you going to light the house? Then Tom kept whispering to me, "Are you sure that was really right there?" But it just beautifully glows in that there are absolutely no distractions, excuse me, there as you see the house during the day. And here is one of my favorite pictures looking down the allée of the linden trees, the sculpted linden trees limbed up for the view. This lawn that we worked, this pool of water that we worked so hard on, the grading and getting that water to be completely flush with the lawn. So in fact, it became a mirror to the sky there. And here was, I'll bet we located this building 50 times if we located it once. This was a building that I call the shed, and Tom would always tap me on the shoulder and say, "No, it's the cube." It's the cube, Tom, it's the cube. How many times that? And he and I personally selected the metal here that would be black, slightly reflective, but we wanted this to be an object there that sat in the garden. And so this cube is really sparkles. We were a little bit afraid to put it here in the beginning. We were going to put it out by the road, but we decided to kind of nestle it up against the house in the garden and find a metal there that would begin to reflect the light of the sky. Because a part of the nature of this house is to be inside the house and be in the garden and to try to understand the changing light, the changing seasons, the color and the temperature of the light, to begin to feel that as part of the spirit of this place and to connect it in the way that Dan Graham's work is, to begin to connect this building to its place, not through indigenous materials, but through the soft reflections capturing the spirit of the place with the light. And now with a few little moments here of Tom, how many of these we had in the file. I told Andy Mazer, our wonderful project architect here, to pull out a few, and he said, "Which one of the hundreds do you want me to pull out?" Of course, Tom never had a computer. He'd never really had a typewriter that I know of. He would handwrite everything and fax it the day before a meeting, and we'd always get these faxes on notebook paper that would outline what he precisely wanted to talk about during that meeting every week, and there were some that came during the week. Every site visit was organized. I wanted to kind of hire him as a person in the office. He was so incredible in trying to get this process together so that we organized ourselves to make this integration and to make a house like this that, of course, had never been made on the island, this kind of house that was more of a steel and glass house than it was a wood and a shingle house here. And here is one of the first diagrams that Tom drew for me about how he wanted to begin to organize the house. And there, of course, is the last resemblance of a guest house. And you can see I kind of took this as a clue that it might not last because it didn't end right there. It was kind of cut off. But this was the kind of beginnings of Tom and I kind of collaborating and making the plan of this place. And then, as you'll see a little bit later, one of the things that we did, I'm so happy we had computers by this time because the vellum would have never stood all the erasures that happened. We changed this drawing. This table would have moved 2 inches, and Tom and I sat by the computer and kind of moved this furniture every week, moved the cord. He wanted us to show the cords for the lamps there as they moved so that they'd be in exactly the right place when the house was built. And we began to organize the sculpture, the paintings, and from here we began to move into full-scale models. And here, of course, as an architect, you hate to get this word right here, remaining work and problems. Here that we began to sweat it out before the meeting here. Of course, we had our exhaustive punch list, but what was Tom's going to be? It was always curious there in February. I'm glad he didn't tell us the date there. And then one of the great visits when they started framing the floor out, Tom went in his usual orange Beetle. My son is a great orange fan. And Tom picked us up in his orange Beetle at the ferry and brought me to the side and just took me by the arm. He didn't know how afraid I was of heights at that point. And somehow he had put this chair out in the middle of this framing on these pieces of plywood. How that all happened, I'll never know. And he took me across, and I'm terrified of heights. Being an architect, that's not a very convenient phobia. And he took me across these little boards there. I was kind of teetering. And he had placed this chair in this precise place that he wanted me to see the architecture and the landscape for that day. And I realized after a couple of these that he wanted me to see it through his eyes. He wanted me to begin to become him, to that idea that I had in the beginning of we were kind of attached at the hip. He wanted me to see it in this way, in this place. And, this is an island. How he got there, he certainly didn't skateboard over there. And, I was teetering, and I don't even remember how he got over there because I was so petrified, how we kind of walked across, and we began then, as the construction process unfolded, to see it through each other's eyes. And he would always take me over to this one place here, and I wanted to photograph it with Scott Francis. He'd take me over here to this place. He never really told me why, but I think it was because the garden was kind of a foil to the house. It was like a scrim to the house, that you see a bit of the house and you see a bit of the garden and the stone wall and the lawn and the canopy of the trees. And this was the atmosphere that he wanted me to understand as the house was going up. And we spoke in a kind of, in the beginning we spoke, and all the way through the process, we spoke in kind of a cryptic way to each other, trying to get each other to understand what we were making here. It was kind of a beautiful poetic relationship that we had. And then, of course, there was the color. My goodness. This color, you can imagine. This took 6 months. And we had to look at this color in the office, on the site, the seasons, in daytime, at nighttime, on the summer solstice, we had to see this color. And we changed it and modified it and mixed it, and it became the color that I use on every project. I hope it's not patented. I'll have to talk to the Armstrong family about that. But it is a beautiful color. And of course, Tom didn't want a white house, and neither did I. And we wanted this kind of gray color to begin to blend and settle into the atmosphere of the garden. That white was too stark. White was a perfect foil for the art, but it was a perfect color to begin to dissolve the architecture into the garden. And this is a great story. I call this Scott Francis versus Tom Armstrong. Scott Francis had quite a strong will. He was the photographer that we had up there. And Scott would spend a long time setting up this photograph, waiting for the right moment. And Scott, of course, being meticulous, he would go and he would turn a little piece on a table because he wanted it to be in a particular way for the photograph. And of course, Scott would go get a drink of water, and Tom would go back and turn it back. He would go back and turn it back, and Scott would kind of look at it and say, and I think there were certain moments when Scott would turn it, then come back and snap it immediately. So this was quite a wonderful couple of days that we had with Tom to photograph the house and get it exactly like they both wanted it. And I don't think this really stopped people from coming to the house. This was the correctional facility sign that a lot of you on Fisher's Island know. And he wanted, I know a lot of you, Tom's humor was famous, and this was one of those pieces that I think people just kept driving and there was a bit of a chuckle there. Hopefully it stopped a few folks. And so this house is really, and this evening is really all about Tom and a testament to what he and I made together. It was a kind of a life-changing experience for me and quite an extraordinary thing. Thank you so much.